Okay. Um, where would you put the first three? Where's the first three in Bloom? Where would you place those? I mean, people might argue about precisely where they go, but are they reasoning tasks or are they reproduction tasks? They're reproduction. You've told them stuff, they tell it you back, yeah? And you assume they understand what they tell you back, and of course they may not, yeah? D, where was that? Analysis, probably. It's why type questions are usually analysis. It's about the detail, as it were. And the last one, where's that? Evaluation. So to sum up what that exercise shows, it's just a little game, of course, but it's got a very important and very influential finding, really, which is that students, and there's much more proper research, this is just a little game, but there's lots of research that shows that students have got to reason with information in order to make sense of it. There are a few students who will learn without that because they'll do the reasoning for you for free, and we'll look at that in a moment. But for most people, in order to understand something, they've got to have thought about it. We don't remember what we're told. We remember what we think about. And I think if we just had that over the door of many classrooms, it would be very helpful, I think. We just don't remember what we're told. We do remember what we think about, what we have to make sense of, and so on. I'll give you an example. SAT tests in England, and some time ago, they set two questions. They're both in red there, on the same exam, on the same paper, on different pages. One was 225 divide 15, and the students had a calculator. And 80% of students could do that first question, 225 divide 15. The next page, there was another question, and it said, if a gardener has 225 bulbs to place equally in 15 flower beds, how many would be in each bed? And only 40% of students could do that, whereas 80% could do the other one, which is another way of saying 80% of students could divide, but only 40%, only half of those, knew when to. Yeah. Now that's about understanding. And I worry that, that if we just set our students reproduction questions, do these divisions, type it into a calculator, get right answer, well done, let's move on. We've got it all right. All my students are getting the right answer. And there's this Jabberwocky assumption that because students are repeating stuff we've told them or shown them, they must understand it. And it doesn't follow that they do. So some teachers will teach division, the students will get the sums right, and then they'll say, great, finished, let's move on. Not much time, lot to get through. Then they teach fractions, and the students gradually move up to be able to apply simple fractions problems, and they get them right, and the teacher says, great, let's move on. And so we skid along the bottom of the taxonomy right the way through the curriculum, and then we set them a question about gardeners, and the students say, I don't know. Because they haven't made an understanding of that process. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's all very well setting these, you're telling us to set these high-level evaluation questions, but I teach entry-level students. I teach students with learning difficulties. I teach level 1 students. But actually, if you look at a good teacher of such students, they're always asking them questions. So, when we make up, this is a level 1 or maybe, maybe lower, catering craft catering course. When we make our apple pie tomorrow, which of these tools will we need? Yeah? Now that's actually, either a problem-solving task, synthesis, or it's an evaluative task. Which of these are the most valuable tools? It's a high-order question, actually. Although it looks superficially like a very simple one, the students have got to use their common sense. They've got to think about the tools and about the menu, the recipe, to decide which of those tools they would use. Which of these knives is best for cutting up apples? And why? Yeah? Evaluation, analysis. I mean, every academic level is capable of going right to the very top of that scenario. The world's expert on teaching students with learning difficulties died, unfortunately, a few years ago. His name was Reuven Feuerstein, right? Absolutely brilliant educationalist, and he developed systems which are now used in 50 countries around the world. And they take students with learning difficulties 2 years behind their peers as young people, and in 4 years they catch them up. You've got a student who's got an IQ of 60, 4 years later they've got an IQ of 100. You wouldn't know them from any other member of the community. We're taking students with moderate learning difficulties and we're turning to fully functional adults with an average ability. It's one-to-one tutoring, 1 hour a day. It's very intensive, it's very special training that's required. But he takes students, and one person he taught came to him personally. One person he taught came to him unable to put the days of the week in order at the age of 14. Right? Unable to put the days of the week in order, and had behavior difficulties. And that student, some years later, admittedly, is now a professor in a university. Right? Still doesn't know what day of the week it is. No, I'm joking. But that just goes to show what can be done, because if the brain if learning and skills and ability and knowledge is about making connections in your brain, then if you make enough connections, you can do it. And if you haven't, you can't. It's just learning that's required to get you there. And if the teaching's right, then the students will get there. So we've got to believe in our students' capacities to actually get there, but it does require high-quality learning. And, the whole of Feuerstein's, this extraordinary program that he devised, as I say, it's used in 50 countries around the world, the whole of this program is called Let's Think. Yeah, it's about teaching thinking skills to people who have got moderate learning difficulties, and indeed others as well. So, it's a complete fallacy to think, as many people do, oh, I've got low-level students, I'll set low-level tasks. Because what happens then is Jabberwocky learning, and the students never get to understand what they're taught. You've got to get up to those evaluative style questions, those reasoning, those analysis type questions, at the right level for that student. Real challenge for the teacher to devise questions which are appropriate, high enough level, but not so difficult that the student can't attempt them. It's really, really important. There's a lovely book by John Biggs. John Biggs, he's a wonderful educationalist and made massive contributions over the last century. He said, imagine two students, there's a video of this on the internet, actually you can find it. I think if you just type in Biggs, Susan Robert, I think you'd find it actually. And he imagines two students. One is Susan. She's motivated, able, and so on. He imagines another student. You won't have students like this in your college, but this student's demotivated and not very able. Right, and this student's called Robert. And I'm not making a sexist point. There are Robertas as well. So he imagines them being given a passive, lower order task. Yeah? Watch this DVD. Yeah? Or listen to me while I explain the role of the district nurse, or whatever it was. So it's a passive, low-order task. But he says, what's going on in their heads? It's quite different. It's quite different. The cognitive processes of Susan are, while she's listening to you explain things, she's saying, yes, but why is it like that? And why is he telling us this anyway? Where would you use this? And then perhaps a little bit later on, oh, I get it. I can see where I'd use it now. And then teacher says something and she says, is that important though? That's just peripheral. Why has he said that? A little bit later on, oh, I can see why it is important now. In other words, while she's listening, she's cognitively engaged. She's actually trying to make, as I hope you are now, trying to make sense, trying to link it in with their own experience and knowledge and so on. So Susan is operating up here in the non-Jabberwocky region of Bloom's taxonomy. She's constructing meaning in the way we talked about this morning. She's trying to form understanding. She's trying to link it with what she already knows. And she's actively engaged in the process of meaning making. And that is the learning process. Roberta, unfortunately, may just be listening, if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, he might be wondering about the back row of Manchester United and what should be done to fix the problem. So Robert's right at the bottom. If you're lucky, he's trying to remember stuff. Not trying to make sense of it, just trying to remember stuff, yeah? Because he hasn't got the right, he's not got the right cognitive attitude. But then Biggs says, and this is a really telling point, a really important point. He says, now imagine those same two students sitting next to each other in the same classroom are set a high-order task. Yeah? The set a task that requires them to construct their own personal meaning. Robert, explain this to Susan. Oh, bugger, she'll notice if I get this wrong. Okay, I'll try and think, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? Sense-making, straight away, yeah? So you've been set a constructivist task to peer explain or to write your own note or to solve a problem or create a solution, create a marketing plan, whatever it is. Suddenly, Robert is forced into the same cognitive strategies that Susan uses for free. He's suddenly forced into being required to make sense of what's being given. And if he was given warning in advance, oh, by the way, Robert, you're going to have to explain this in 25 minutes' time. So watch this DVD carefully and make some notes and make sure you're able to understand this, because you're going to be explaining it to Susan pretty soon. But, you know, if you're given some warning, or in a moment, I'm going to ask you to devise your own marketing plan. Okay, that's going to happen at the end of the lesson. So make sure you're prepared and ready to do that. So, you know, what we've got now, we've forced Robert into the same sort of cognitive strategies that Susan was do for free. And Biggs says everybody can learn. And Feuerstein shows us everybody can learn. If, and this is a huge if, and it's in our control as teachers, if we use the right tasks. And this is one of the reasons why, why teachers have such massive impact on whether students learn or whether they don't. Because if you stay at that level, your Roberts won't learn, and you'll say, well, I told you he was a bit thick. You know, not very, you know, he's not the brightest, you know, guy in the, no wonder he only got 25%. Whereas the better teachers will say, well, you know, let's get this blighter making sense. Let's get some feedback. Let's try and make this person really learn effectively, and then they're going to do much better. Notice you're closing the gap between the more able and the less able by this very process of setting the right tasks. But the tasks must be reasoning tasks. But reasoning tasks can be very, very simple. But ideally, they're perhaps a little bit, you know, that question could be given to Susan. Which of these knives is best for cutting up apples? And then you might say to Susan, well, why do you think that one's smaller? And she said, well, because it's smaller. And you might then say, well, why is it being small? Why does that help? And she gives you a reason. And then you say, why is that then? You know, so you can push Susan further and further. You might be happy with, you know, with Robert's answer. Well, you use the small one so you don't cut your finger off. You know, and if that's an adequate answer, you know, you might be prepared to stick to that. Interestingly, very able teachers push those weaker students further and further as well, until eventually they fall over, and then they say to the Robert, when they've not managed to think of the answer to the next question up, as it were, they say, anybody help Robert? Okay, Susan, can you tell us? And when Susan's given the answer, the teacher says, well done, thank you, that's right, and then goes back to Robert and says, so what's the answer to that? That's a wonderful strategy, isn't it? Because Robert now gives me the right answer because he's heard Susan give it, yeah? And you say, well done. And Robert begins to think, hey, I can bloody do this. Yeah? All you have to do is to reason it out for yourself, you know, but in the end, I'll get there. So, what we need are, you know, it's the old story again. Look at that challenging task. Hang on, haven't we been here before, only a different title? Yes, it is. It's formative assessment. It's getting Roberta going around that cycle of actually learning. And Feuerstein says, you know, give me 4 years. Interestingly, in that 4 years, he only teaches them for 2, the first 2. And then he leaves them for a couple of years while they gradually fill in all the gaps and sort things out for themselves and learn by themselves. So give me somebody for 2 years, 1 hour a day, and, you know, I'll get you to average intelligence from almost nowhere, which is an astonishing achievement.